You're listening to the Clear Creek Resources podcast from Clear Creek Community Church. To hear more, check out clearcreekresources.org.
So today we are here with Amy Ward and Meredith Ward Harris. Thank you, ladies, for being here today. We're going to be talking about grief in the holidays. And so Christmas time is a time of year that we associate with joy and happiness and giving gifts and celebrating and all of these fun things that are typically really happy and very relationally intensive. And that's all good unless you've just recently lost someone or there's someone missing from those gatherings. And that's what we're going to talk about is how do we, as Christ followers, navigate that grief or walk with someone who is navigating that grief. And so I just want to thank you both for being willing to be here and talk about your experience, for sharing your life so generously with us. And thank you very much. About 2 years ago, Denise Ward, your mom and your mother-in-law, and Carrie Sutherland gathered with us, and we did a podcast to talk about grief in the holidays as they spoke about losing their adult children and what the holidays were like. And so your perspective is going to help us as well, and we're just really grateful for your willingness to be here. Amy, will you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so it was November 2018, and my husband Bill was just going to the lake house for a fun weekend with his buddies. And there was just an unexpected accident, and he ended up passing away in the hospital early the next morning on November 3rd. At the time, we had a son, Ollie. He was, I think, 22 months old, and I was 5 months pregnant with our daughter, Marley. And so it was very much an unexpected loss. We didn't see it coming. So within just hours, my life just radically changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So same loss, same person.
Mm-hmm.
And so that Bill is my brother, and so also received a phone call that something had happened at our lake house and that he was being life-flighted. And so, so looking back, I'm grateful I got to sit with Ollie for a little bit while that was happening at the hospital. And then we had friends come and take over, and we were all there at the hospital together when we had to say goodbye. So again, radical change. And I think something significant for me is that Bill is my only sibling. So, there's also just this, my one only sibling is gone. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that deep grief has profound impact on every day, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
How does that impact holidays like Christmas, for instance?
Yeah. I think it impacts every aspect of it. So I think once you experience loss, especially loss kind of out of chronological order, what once was, like you said, where you found joy in, where there was excitement, where kind of like giddy for it, you lose that because the person that you shared that with is now gone. And so there's a real shift. And I think it changes through time as the grief process is, as you move forward in it. But I can say for the first year, 2 years, I was like, Bill loved Christmas. He loved everything about Christmas. He was like Mr. Christmas. And so specifically that holiday, like, this is just horrible. Like, holidays will never be joyful again. They will always sting. That was my mindset. This is hard. I don't want to do this because the person you want there is not there. And so I can say now 3 years out and almost, so this will be the 4th Christmas without Bill. It's different than the first year, but there still is you always have on your mind that person is not there, no matter where you're at in your grief walk. And so there's old things that used to be joyful that now sting, and then you create new things that bring joy now that weren't there when that person was there. So there's so many aspects and dynamics that change, but specifically in the first year, 2 year, 3 year, it's still really fresh.
Yes.
And it's really hard. And, people think it's supposed to look the way it used to look, but it will never look the way it once did. And I think sometimes that's hard for people to wrap their mind around that aren't directly connected to the loss. So, but I can also say to encourage and have hope in year 4th Christmas, I'm starting to see joy again in it, and being able to see Bill in it brings me joy rather than just pain and sorrow. But for a long time, it was just painful and I was just very sad all the time during the holidays. Specifically, Thanksgiving is very family oriented. My husband's gone. Christmas is very romantic movies on the TV and
Not helpful.
Yes,
Not helpful.
mom and dad shopping for the gifts for the kids and getting to put those out and all that. And it's that wasn't my reality. So in some ways it was really hard, and me and Meredith have talked about this. It was good because it shifted my perspective back to what is Christmas really about? And I have so much more appreciation. I always say now, since Bill passed, Christmas is the day that everything changed for us, and that it has allowed us to have hope in our grief. And so there's some things that I've let go of that I don't see as important anymore, and then some things that I've grabbed onto that I don't ever want to let go of, even as I move forward in my grief. And one of those is specifically, we celebrate Christmas because Christ came to this earth that is broken, and that is something to be celebrated because it changes everything for all of us forever. And so that's another thing that was a shift in the holiday season.
For sure.
For me, I think the holidays bring up a lot of like Amy said, Bill was like Father Christmas. So, there are so many memories of our childhood and the excitement around that and the ridiculous amount of lights when he was in college and, putting videos up on YouTube and, all these memories. And I think one of the harder things that I have as a sibling is, you envision what holidays will continue to be like now that you have families and you have spouses and as your parents are aging and, and they really solidify into that grandparent role. And then, and then you all get together and what that's like. And all of those memories, all of the fun memories are frozen. And it's hard to accept that there's not going to be, there's not going to be this that type of excitement, I guess, of all together watching our kids open gifts, or even just I used to say, I still say, sometimes on hard days, I just really miss my old problems, and because there's this element of my parents don't have their son here, or Ollie and Marley don't have their dad, Amy doesn't have her husband, and so it's hard that just the untainted joy and silliness and the lights and the whatever, it's tainted a little bit.
Yeah,
so
it's not so carefree.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So how do you, people, you sort of answered this, Amy, but how do you hold the tension of God's sovereignty and goodness and the reality of the suffering that you are experiencing? And people are so often quick to say, well, God will use this, which is true.
Yes.
We know that to be true. How do you feel when someone says that?
I think It's dependent on where you're at in your grief, but for the most part, I would say it's not helpful because that's something that they have to wrestle with God with, and they have to go toe to toe with Him, and He is who He says He is, and He will be faithful to them in the wrestling. So it's not, I know that people's heart, they're trying to help, right? Mm-hmm. It's hard to see people you love in pain, and you want to fix it, and you want to make it all better. But the way that you can love them best, I always used to tell people, they'd say, what can we do? What can we do to like help? And I'm like, you just need to be okay with me not being okay for a really long time.
Yeah.
And so I think like just being okay, and even if it's uncomfortable for you to let down your expectations of what the holidays should look like for that person, for your family, for whatever the dynamics of your relationship is, and just let that person grieve, and let them not be okay on Christmas. And if they want to be a little bah humbug, that's okay. Like they are grieving and lamenting a loss, and there's deep pain there. Death is not the way God intended it. So I just think, the greatest thing I would want to say is don't give advice, listen.
That's right.
Cry with them, give them the freedom to do or say or be what they need to be in that moment, and be okay with them not being okay. I think I was grateful, my family and the Wards and Meredith's family and my friends were okay with that. And that I'm finding is a rarity in grief. And so I'm very grateful that I had that kind of support system. But that's one thing I'm like, just don't put expectations on them that, because they're in a different place. And Christmas and the holidays will never be what they used to be because they will never be who they used to be. And so, understanding that.
Yeah. Really, everybody changes.
Yes.
Everybody changes.
Yeah.
So when you consider the holidays and the grief, and frankly, over the last couple of years around here, we've had a lot of loss. There's been a lot of loss. And so when you both have children, young children, and a little bit older children, Meredith. So how have you helped your kids sort of navigate this grief? I know it probably looks different for both of you.
I would say we actually talked about this today at lunch a little bit about how it has looked different having little ones, and then so Camille was 7, my youngest, when Bill passed away. And so I'm really just now seeing some of the more like, I have questions about what this means about God's sovereignty, about how could something like this happen when our family loves Jesus? And so those questions are just now happening. But I would say over, the abstract, understanding the abstract, and that somebody that you love has passed away and their body is here, but their soul is in heaven with the Lord, that is where they are now and where they reside, has been complicated. And I was sharing with Amy, like, it's been very difficult for me to kind of enter into hard conversations. So I'm having an internal monologue of, I don't want to talk about this because this is painful. I want him to be here. I want, I don't want him to be, in his body to be in the ground or whatever, like just these types of hard questions. But the reality is they lost their uncle, who we saw weekly and who was actively involved in their lives. And so they have very real pain, but it looks different from adult pain. It comes out a lot of times in the form of questions, I would say. And then that just evolves. And so we're talking about today about just being open to have those conversations, be that in the car, be that no place that makes sense whatsoever to have those conversations,
Usually inconvenient.
Like just totally not prepared, and to just let that happen. And then I told her, and then I would go in my bedroom and sob, of just, I don't want, I don't want everything that I just said to be true.
Right.
And so, but I would say that I am grateful because I had shared with Amy that Camille said probably a year ago, and she was struggling. She's more of my deep thinker kid, as far as like she feels your pain, and so I feel like I try to be more careful with, just my own tears. Like I am okay. I'm crying because I miss him or because this is sad, but I am not in despair. Like just using that language, but with her, I would say she just kind of the evolving of her thoughts and what's happened, is ever changing. And she thought, because I guess this is kind of how it's projected on movies, when someone dies, a lot of times it becomes so painful that I guess nobody talks about it. Like, don't talk about that with them because it'll make them cry, or you need to be strong for whatever. That's how it's depicted.
Right. Yeah.
And so she said she had a really hard time at the beginning that we all still kept talking about Bill, and that we would all like laugh when we got together about stories, and that it was still normal for him to be a part of our lives. And she said that was very uncomfortable for her because she thought it was going to be like, okay, he's gone, and we're just going to close our hearts off to that door. And the fact that we didn't, and that means tears and laughter and whatever was a shock to her. And so I think helping our kids navigate that maybe what they see on TV or what those expectations are of like how to navigate this are not what God wants,
Right.
And
Right.
so,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's a beautiful
good.
picture of holding the joy and the sadness
Yes.
all at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That tension.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, for my kids, because they're younger. So Ollie's just now starting to ask more questions. Before he would be able to verbalize that he missed his dad. And we always talked about him. He's still a part of our conversations. I still have a picture of him and I in my room. And so they very much know who their dad is. It's a part of the conversations at Grandma and Pop's. It's a part of a conversation at Aunt Mare's. So for Ollie, he was able to verbalize that he missed him, but that's about it. And I would always say to him, like, I'm sorry. I would try to validate, like, it's okay to miss him. It's normal to miss people when they go. But I tried to always say too, like, but I do believe that Jesus will carry us every day, Ollie. I said that to him. And, so wanting him to know that, and I always said to him, like, you can feel however you want to feel about this. Like, you can be, angry, confused, not even know how to feel about this, because I always wanted to create an environment where he felt safe to talk about whatever emotion he was having in regards to his dad not being around. So that has just opened up an environment, like Meredith said, where we talk about it. We talk about dad. We talk about what he liked. If we see something, I'm like, your dad used to love that, or so he's still, he will always be a part of our family. He'll always be a part of Ollie and Marley and me. And then for Marley, she's younger and just now starting to become verbal. So it looks a little different. I'll say in both of them I've seen on heavy days like holidays, anniversaries, even though they cannot cognitively verbalize what's going on, their body knows the trauma. And I see that in their behavior, or they're just overly emotional at times. I guess I shouldn't say overly emotional. Their emotions are hypersensitive. And I have to remind myself, and it's like something in your mama's heart knows, like, this isn't disobedience, there's something deeper here. And just to like name it and say, like, this is their grief and this is the trauma their little body holds, and to not, get angry with him, but in those moments know that he needs to just be held, because every time that happens, ultimately at the end, I say, Ollie, what's going on in your heart? And he says, I miss my daddy. So they can't verbalize it, but you will see it in them. And so to know it still affects them. Even Marley was not yet born, right, when Bill passed away, but even her being, still just in womb, like, it still affected her. The trauma is still very real to her, even though she was not physically present on earth, like in my belly, but not just like independently. So, kids have a lot more going on in their heads than people give them credit for.
Yes, they do. Yes,
And
you're so right.
And so it probably is, for the most part, they are thinking about the loss of their parent, and when they get a little older, they'll be able to tie that together. And also one thing I think is helpful is just to talk about emotions, not necessarily just always tied to grief,
Right.
but in general, like, this makes me excited. And so they can start to understand, like, kind of what they're feeling in their body and what emotion is tied to that, just so they have, like, to help them understand that kind of relationship, I think is good. So just being okay with emotions and talking about emotions and what they all hold, I think is helpful. And, there's some things I've carried on traditions for the kids that Bill and I started, and I've continued to do, which I think is helpful. And as they get older, I will let them lead out more. I think I'm learning, specifically in this last year, as Ollie's older and able to verbalize more, some things that I may think he needs, he doesn't, and then some things that he may need, I may not see. So to let them really kind of take the lead in what they need, because you want their voice to be in it as well, of what it looks like to grieve in this time of heavy days, of holidays and anniversaries and all those kind of things. So, just get really comfortable with feelings. Yeah, that's why. Yeah, because there's going to be a lot of them, and it's not a bad thing.
No,
yeah,
not at all. I think both of you really demonstrate so much wisdom in how you're walking with your kids in this, because at every stage they're becoming more aware, and so it changes, right?
Yeah.
But if they're not talking to you about it, they're filling in those blanks.
Yeah.
And so, way to go for the way that you're engaging them with that, and engaging them within the context of other people and the relationships they have. Both of your families have lots of wonderful adults in their lives.
Yes, very true.
And that's a huge gift to both of them. So that's really good.
Yes.
So, you've said specifically about what when you're walking with someone who's really grieving a deep loss through the holidays. You've already spoken to that, and I appreciate that so much, what you said about just letting people be where they are.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you might add to the person who is grieving about the holidays, about being with people that you love? I know Bruce tells a story about a man that's a part of our church that he told Bruce one time, he said, I want to wear a sign that says, "Ask me about Debbie."
Yes.
Yeah. And, you want to share the person that you love. And we're all tempted to just be silent because we don't want to bring up his name because I don't want to upset you.
Yes.
But it's helpful to hear, no, say his name.
Yes.
I remember Bill.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. I would say absolutely. Yeah, he's still a part of our lives. He is and always will be. I mean, so that for sure. I think too, Meredith and I were talking about, so there's me, Bill's wife, and there's Meredith, his sister, and then there's Dave and Denise, his parents. We're grieving the same person, and Meredith had shared this with me, and I constantly am telling people this. We're all on the same mountain, the counselor said, but we're in different places because we're grieving different relationships. So as you're walking alongside people that are grieving the same person as you are, just be cognizant of, like, their needs may be different than your needs. Be able to have grace with each other. Grace is very, very important because you're bound to say something or do something that's going to hurt that person or not what they didn't need. And I'm grateful with the words. And with Meredith, like, we have a relationship where we say, hey, that kind of like hurt a little bit, and we can talk about that. And So I'm grateful that that is our situation, but yeah, it's hard because we're all grieving Bill. We all miss Bill in the holidays, but what we miss is different, even though it's the same person. And so even if you're grieving and you have a close relationship with the person who's also grieving that same person, just know that what they need may look different than what you need, and to kind of give and take and compromise and show grace in the grieving around the holidays. Because, Meredith may want, this is just an example, but like a big picture of Bill on the mantle, and I may be like,
Yes,
there's no way. There's no way. But I'm
No.
like, but she needs that. So let's talk about that. And how can we, how can we have what she needs? Or maybe like, yeah, that's hard for me, but I can endure that for Christmas Day. And then I just will ask them to take it down,
Yes.
And so just to be understanding of everybody's grief is different, even though it's the same person. Yeah.
Wow, that's a good word. That's a good word.
Yeah.
Meredith, do you have anything to add to that?
You've kind of talked about the tension, and we're talking about that as well. So I'm very linear thinking. When I entered into grief, I really saw this as like, one point leads to another point, which leads to another point, which to continue to use, grief as the mountain. I think I wanted to put my hiking boots on and go straight to the top, and then realized because I did that, right, I'm like puking my guts up from altitude sickness. That was not a good choice, kind of thing. And then you have this meandering, almost stalled out at the bottom. And what avenue do I want to take? I mean, I just identify so much with just how it makes no sense is what I will say.
Yes.
And so I want to make sense of it,
Yeah.
and I want, because this is the fourth Christmas, for it to feel marginally better, than Christmas 3, than Christmas 2 and 1, and all of that to make sense.
Yeah.
And I want my reaction to be the same as, you were saying, the picture on the mantle. I want to think that would be a great idea, and that we would all stand around and, we just love Bill, and, where my, reaction is I just want to set that on fire, It's and so it's just, it's been surprising, and that I think when we give into, and maybe we'll talk about this in a minute, but it's just the letting go of that either I have to be sad or I have to be joyful, that you can't be both. Letting go of that untruth is so freeing.
Yes.
But it is not depicted outside of Jesus.
Yes. Right.
Because everything outside of Christ will tell you that you need to be one or the other. And so I think I struggled in the past, especially at the beginning, of I can't have joy at these things that were joyful, because that means that I'm not feeling the loss of Bill. And I want to feel that because that mattered, and so there's this element of once you're seeing that you can hold both, that you see that Jesus wept, you see that Jesus cried out to God and said, is there another way? And then realizing, that the answer was no, or the answer has been no, but that God still endured that suffering and had joy and continued to press into people and all of that, and that those two can be held at the same time. And so I think that what has helped with hard, joyful days is that you can feel both, and you don't have to turn one on and turn one off.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
And there's not something wrong with you when you feel both of those. Because sometimes that can feel very disorienting to have both of those feelings so strongly.
Yes. Because they're in such opposition to each other, And same to that, I was telling Meredith, in the first year, I always feared if I trusted God, I would have to let go of Bill, right? If I move towards God, I move away from Bill. And if I move towards Bill, then I move away from trusting God. And God said to me, Amy, it'll be a lifetime of missing Bill, but it'll be a lifetime of seeing God's faithfulness. And just because you trust God doesn't mean you don't miss Bill. And just because you miss Bill doesn't mean you trust God. Right? Did I say that right? Yeah. And just because you trust God doesn't mean you don't miss Bill. Mm-hmm. So in that moment, I was like, oh, man, I can have both. You know, I can trust God, and I can believe that He is faithful to His promises, and He will not leave me. And I can miss Bill and wish he was here, and that does not negate from my faith in God. Exactly. And so that's very contradictory to what we're taught, right? But with, like Meredith said, but when we walk with Christ in pain and suffering, we hold both. And I just think I've really grown to understand the tension of the redemption of already not yet, right? Mm-hmm. Right. That's it, right?
Yes, it is.
It's
yes,
we have parts of us where we see redemption and we see healing and all that, but then there's parts where we still feel the brokenness because it's not completely redeemed yet, but it will be one day, and so that tension is very real of the Jesus came, but He still has to come back to redeem it all. So,
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a beautiful gift that you have given us. Mm-hmm. And, because I know you both, I know that you live your lives, you're sharing now with a lot of people that you don't know, but you live your life very much in community with other people, and you let people in. And, you have from day one. And it's such a gift to us, to this community, that both of you have been so open and honest and transparent with your grief and with your lives, because you hold those things so well together. And we're grateful because you're really helping us in ways that we can only be helped by you in that. Yeah. And so thank you very much for that. So much of what you have said about grief are things that no one really says, and how hard it is. And so we're grateful for your offering and for your time to be here today. Your folks lead a class called Grief Share, and it that series on grief really has been helpful for a lot of people. That we'll be starting one again in January for those who are listening that might be interested in attending. And so is there anything final that you would want to say to either someone who is grieving or someone who's walking with someone that's grieving in regard to the holidays?
I think first, to those that are grieving, I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry that this pain has come into your life, because it's very painful, and death is not the way God ever intended it to be. Just pray, and you may not be in a place where you think that the holidays could ever be joyful again. I've been there and had people say that to me, and honestly had the thought in my mind, maybe for you, but not for me. But the truth is, there will be joy again. And there was a beautiful picture on, I think it was Instagram or something, but it was this ball and it was the grief. And then this jar just kept on getting bigger, but the ball stayed the same, and that's how grief works, right? It doesn't shrink, it doesn't get smaller, it's always a part of you, but your life starts to grow around it, and it will. So I just always want to say to those that are grieving, I'm sorry, but I also hold so much hope for the future of what God has for you and the redemption that will be a part of your story.
Yeah. It's a good word.
One of the things Amy and I talked about, when you say that holding this terrible thing has happened, but God is faithful to use it. One of those is the holiday, in the fact that we were sharing today about how before, the holidays were just like lights and food and gifts and whatever. And now, really the beginning of the Advent season, and we all the focus is on this, He's coming. man, it's just so much sweeter now. Yeah. And there is an anticipation of really God's people. You feel united with them more about what that would have been like that they were anticipating this promise to be fulfilled, and he's coming. And so, and I think that has made the holidays richer in that sense. Yes. In the you sing the songs and you're like, yes, joy to the world.
Yes.
And he is coming and all of this, Bill, he is in heaven with the Lord and we will be there with him celebrating. And so I think there is that sweetness that if you allow yourself to lean into that and to just celebrate that Jesus, he was born and he's going to take all this junk and has taken it all on himself. Right. And so, just the joy of the anticipation of the season and of Jesus' birth. Yeah. So,
That's beautiful. Mm-hmm. Your loss has clearly impacted the poignancy of the season.
Yes.
Yeah. And so,
because the rest is just it's fun. I mean, I feel like I have witnessed so many of our pastors say, I'm not a fun squasher. Like, it is fun. The lights are fun. The hot chocolate's fun. It is fun, but don't miss Jesus in it all. And there is that, like, where you're holding both, right? Yeah. That it's like, we do want to allow the joy and the fun in. But because we're walking through grief, there is that element of the anticipation of his coming. Yes. And that we're so grateful now in a way that was different than before. Right. You just can feel it. So, yeah.
And it's clearly how God has used it in both of your lives. So what a gift. Thank you both so much for sharing your stories with us.
Thanks for having us.
Yes. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for checking out this video. If you haven't yet, make sure that you hit subscribe down below and check out ClearCreekResources.org, where we have videos, books, and sermons on there, as well as our audio podcast. Thanks for watching.